Hello everyone, this is BREANNA RUTTER, author of over 14 hair care books and founder of HowToBlackHair.com. For this tutorial, I'm going to be teaching you how to do a full sew-in hairstyle using Mrs. Rutter's hair extensions from MrsRutters.com. For the following supplies you will need to do this look will be 3 bundles of Mrs. Rutter's hair extensions in the length 24 inches, 22 inches, and 20 inches. You will also need nylon sewing thread, weaving needles, a weaving net, a little bit of braiding hair, a rat tail comb, a wide tooth comb, a dry towel, hair cutting scissors, rubber bands, duck bill clips, and heat protectant as well as a flat iron. So once you have all of your supplies and your hair extensions ready, in the very next step, step number 2, I'm going to be teaching you how to achieve your braid pattern as well as how to sew down your weaving net. Welcome to step number 2 of the full sew-in hairstyle. In this step, I'm going to be teaching you how to create your braid pattern as well as how to sew down your weaving net. When you're creating your braid pattern, you're going to need some braiding hair and then your rat tail comb and wide tooth comb to assist you while braiding. When sewing down your weaving net, make sure that your weaving needles are prepared and you have your net on hand. So as you can see, my braid pattern is almost finished, but I have one last final braid to sew down, which I will teach you. Now the reason why I went ahead and braided all of my hair is because the process is very repetitive. If you don't know how to cornrow braid your hair, I highly suggest that you visit HowToBlackHair.com to purchase the Cornrow braiding DVD. In that DVD, you'll learn how to braid with extensions and without extensions. So for doing your braids, you have to use a little bit of extension hair to braid your cornrow braids to make your braids a little bit more firm and to also limit the frizz underneath your install. So what you want to do is braid 2 braids on the very perimeter of your head and make them go all the way around your head and connect them in the back. For the rest of your hair, you are literally going to braid it straight to the back in cornrow braids. With each 2 cornrow braids that come to the back, you're going to connect it to turn them into 1. So you're going to see that as I am stitching down the final braid to teach you how to sew down your braids for your braid pattern. Also, when you're braiding your hair, make sure that the extension hair exceeds about 3 inches past your real hair and then tie it with a rubber band. So that way when you're ready to take down your style, you just got to cut above the rubber band to safely take down your braids. So as you can see, this is the very back of my head. And as I explained, each 2 cornrow braids you braid, you have to connect it into one final braid and put a rubber band at the end of your braid. Now the size of the braids will depend on how thick or thin your hair is. And as always, no matter your texture, I suggest that you use small to medium sized cornrow braids so that when you're doing your full sew-in, your install is very flat. If your braids are too big, your style will look bulky. So the smaller your braids, the better. So now that your braid pattern is fully finished, as you can see, most of the braids have already been sewn down. And then this braid back here in the back was sewn just straight across onto itself. So now I just have one final braid here, and when you stitch down your braid, what you want to do is grab your braid, open up your 2 cornrow braids, and lay your braid right in the middle so it's as flat as possible. Stitch down your base 2 times, and then stitch going all the way up by putting the needle underneath both cornrow braids and underneath the braid here in the middle until you work your way all the way up to finish sewing down your braid. So now with your needle and thread prepared, you're going to lift the braid up to nestle right between the 2 cornrow braids, and you're going to go ahead and begin stitching. You're going to go underneath all of your braids at the very base. Once you pull the needle through to the other side, grab one string and wrap it around the needle twice and pull straight through to create your knot. You're going to do this one more time. Grab your string, wrap it around twice, and pull through to create your knot. You're going to continue to do this knotting technique throughout any stitches you do when you're stitching down your braids and also when you're stitching down your extensions. So make sure you locate where the braid is and always keep it nestled between your two cornrow braids, and continue to make stitches going all the way around all of the braids. Pull the needle out and then create your knot. Keep working your way all the way up to your braid until it's all the way sewn down. So after you finish braiding your hair and sewing down the rest of your braids, this is how your final braid pattern should look when doing your full sew-in hairstyle. So now that your braid pattern is finished, I'm going to be teaching you in detail how to sew your weaving net onto your braid pattern base. So right before I actually begin stitching down my weaving net, I'm going to briefly explain to you the process that you want to do from start to finish. What you want to do is make sure that you have the weaving net stretched a long way and you're going to place it over your head. So the sides are literally going to be very short against your braids, and you're going to have most of the net hanging down in the back, which you will see in just a minute. Now, as you're sewing down your weaving net, start in the front and you're going to sew going all the way down to the side. I like to start on my left side. Then you're going to take another needle and thread and start at the front again, and you're going to stitch all the way over to go all the way down to this side. So that way, as you're finished stitching, you're keeping the weaving net stretched and even. Now, you can take your last needle, hold the rest of the weaving net down with your other hand, keep it stretched, and then make your stitches. And you're going to stop a little bit past your ear. Then you're going to let that needle hang down, and you're going to repeat the same thing on the other side. You're going to keep your weaving net stretched, so that way it's flat to your head as you're making your stitches all the way past your ear. Then when you finish the back, still keep it stretched with your hand and continue stitching until you stop at the very back of your head, and then repeat the same process until you stop at the back. When you're finished, you're going to cut off the needle and thread and cut off any remaining net that's hanging past your braids. The most important thing to remember is that you have to go back and forth to keep the tension even on the net so it's not shifting, and you also have to keep the weaving net stretched so that way when you're done it's flat to your braids. So now I'm going to begin sewing down my weaving net. Make sure that you unravel your weaving net and you place it on your head the long way, which means that when you put it onto your head, most of the net hangs down in the back, and you have just a short amount of net here on the sides of your head. Now you want to put it in position evenly and make sure that the beginning of the net is going right over your perimeter braid, which is here in the front. Now as you position it, you're going to begin making your stitches. You're going to start in the middle, work your way to the side, and let that needle hang like I've told you before. You're going to start with another needle, go through to the side, and let it hang down at that point. And then you're going to go back and forth one side to the other side to the other side to the other side to keep the tension even so that you can finish sewing down your weaving net. So now make sure that you have your weaving needles prepared. Make sure it's placed over your braid, and you're going to make your first stitch in the middle. Make sure to go through the net, under your braid, back out through the net, and create your knot. Then you're going to pull straight through. Keep repeating this process throughout braiding your perimeters until you finish sewing down the weaving net. Through the net, under your braid, and back through the net, and then create your knot. Go around needle twice and pull through. Once you're finished sewing down your weaving net, make sure to trim off the excess netting that's left behind. So I'm going to start at the very middle of my head, and I'm going to work my way all the way to the back, and then I'm going to do the same thing in the middle and working my way all the way to the back on the other side to finish removing the net. As you can see, creating your braid pattern is an extremely easy process. Just make sure to sew down the tail ends of your braids and sew your weaving net onto your braids. So now that your hair is prepared, in the very next step, step number 3, I'm going to be teaching you how to sew Mrs. Rutter's hair extensions from mrsrutters.com onto your braid pattern base. Welcome to step number 3 of the full sew-in hairstyle. In this step, I'm going to be teaching you how to sew Mrs. Rutter's hair extensions from mrsrutters.com onto your braid pattern base. So for this step, make sure you have your weaving needles prepared and your hair extensions on hand as well to do this process. So in this step, I'm going to be teaching you how to sew your hair extensions onto your braid pattern base. The hair that I'm using is Mrs. Rutter's hair extensions from mrsrutters.com, and I'm going to be doing my full sew-in with 3 bundles of hair. The bundle lengths are going to be 24 inches, 22 inches, and 20 inches. Also, the hair comes in a natural brown color, but I decided to dye it black. If you want to know how to dye your hair extensions, then I suggest that you visit howtoblackhair.com to check out that coloring tutorial. So, to begin, what you want to do is first begin sewing your extension anywhere on your head, wherever you want, at the very perimeter of your head. So what I mean by that is you can start in the front, you can start on the sides or the back, wherever you choose. I'm going to start on the perimeter of my head, here on the side. Once I begin stitching, I'm going to go in a continuous circle, which my circle is going to start here and it's going to go all the way around my head back to that point. When I close off that point to make sure there's no gap there, I'm going to continue to stitch in a circle throughout the entire process. So for your 24 inches, 22 inches, and 20 inches, they're all going to be sewn in the direction of a circle. So I'm going to begin by showing you how to stitch your extensions onto your braid pattern base. Now, what you want to do first before you begin sewing your extensions to your braid pattern base is to secure your needle and thread at the very beginning of your weft. What you see in between my fingers is the actual hair itself, and what the hair is coming from is what you call a weft. So now what you want to do is take your needle, insert it through the weft, and pull it out to create your knot. As always, you have to do the same knotting technique whenever you need to create knots, which is by taking the needle and pulling it through the string twice, and then pulling through to create your knot. Now for your second knot, go around the weft to create it. So now that your string is secure, it's going to help you keep track of where your extension is as you begin stitching it down to your braid pattern base. So now I'm going to stitch about here at this point, and as you make your first stitch, you're going to go underneath, or actually you're going to go through the net, underneath the braid, and then pull straight through. This is to bring your extension up exactly where you want it sewn down. So now for your second stitch, you're going to go through the net, underneath the braid, and then you're going to go around the weft to create your knot. Locate your string, wrap it around the needle twice, and pull through. Do this once again. Go through your net and under your braid and also under the weft. Make sure the needle comes through and then create your second knot. Now after you create your second knot, you're going to continue to stitch going alongside your perimeter. So now readjust your fingers and you're going to go over to a space that's about here and you're going to create your next stitch. When you're stitching along your perimeter, make sure that the track is laying right against your skin so that it's as flat as possible when you're sewing it down. So now just continue sewing until you go into an entire circle, and keep stitching your extensions to go into a circle. Here I am at the point where I've fully sewn down a 24-inch bundle, and as you can see, this is how much space it takes up so far. Now when you're sewing your extensions, make sure that the space from each track, you're able to slide your index finger through. You don't need the extensions so close together because you don't want your full sewing to look too thick. So a great distance to use is to be able to slide your index finger in between each of the areas that you've sewn a layer. So now I'm going to show you how you go on to your next set of extensions, which is the 22 inches. And to make this process easier when adding in your extension, you simply want to leave your needle and thread intact to begin sewing in your other set. So I've left my needle and thread in, and you're simply going to grab your new bundle of extensions, and you're going to insert it through the weft of the extensions. Once you insert it through the weft, you just draw the string all the way up, and it's going to go exactly at the point that you stopped at. Now at this point, you're just going to create 2 knots there at the base of your extension and then continue to sew. When your bundle ends at the very end where you're closing off your 22 inches, you're also going to secure the last point that you stitched down with 2 knots as well. So stitch the beginning with 2 knots, and then also always stitch the end of your bundle with 2 knots. But throughout the process, do 1 knot at a time. So now, as you can see, I've completely sewn in the 22-inch bundle, and what's left to sew now is the 20-inch bundle. So as you can see, after sewing in all of your extensions, you're going to leave a very small space at the top to create your handmade closure that I will teach you in another step. To make sure you have enough space left, just take 2 of your fingers and place it right at the hole. If in all directions it's about the space of 2 fingers, that's the perfect amount of space you want. If it's too small, your closure may not be able to work properly, or if it's too big, it will look very obvious that you've created a closure. So once you get to this point, you should have a little bit of hair left over from your 20 inches to now create your closure later. In this step, I taught you how to sew your hair extensions onto your braid pattern base. Be sure to keep in mind that you want to continue sewing in a circle, and also you want to start with the longest length on bottom and then work your way up to your shortest length. When you're done, you need to leave a small space at the top because I'm going to teach you how to close off your full sew-in. In the very next step, step number 4, I'm going to be teaching you how to create your handmade closure to finish off your full sew-in hairstyle. Here we are in step number 4 of the full sew-in hairstyle with Mrs. Rutter's hair extensions. In this step, I'm going to be teaching you how to create your handmade closure to close off your full sew-in look. Now here we are at the point where I'm going to be teaching you how to make your handmade closure. From the space that you left on the top of your head, you want to make sure that when you place your 2 fingers on that space and go in any direction, it's about the space of your 2 fingers. For me, that's about 2 inches wide. Now when you create your closure, I suggest that you use your hand as a guide to make sure that the length of your weft is long enough. So literally make sure that the weft is from your middle finger all the way down to the bottom of the palm of your hand. For me, that would be 7 inches. At this point, what you want to do is make sure that you have your needles and thread prepared, your hair clips, a rubber band, hair cutting scissors, your comb, and your flat iron with a dry towel, because we will have to flatten out the closure after you create it. So when you first begin, what you want to do is take your closure. You want to insert your needle and thread right at the tip of it and create 2 knots. And when you create 2 knots, you're going to fold the weft and you're going to sew it with 2 knots and then continue to fold it into a circle, which you will see in just a second. So take your needle and thread and go through the weft. Once you go through the weft, create a knot. And then you're going to do it once more to secure the knot by going through the weft. So now after you've done that, you're going to roll the weft into a circle. After you create a circle, you're going to secure that circle with 2 knots. So you're going to go underneath all of the wefts. Create your first knot, and then your second knot. And then you're going to keep doing this process by creating 2 knots along the fold of each circle. And when you reach the end, you're going to go through the very tip of the weft twice to create your knot, just like you did at the beginning. So what you've seen at the beginning, at the tip of the weft, is what you're going to do at the end on the last tip of the weft. So just keep rolling it into a circle and create 2 knots along the way. So now, as I've stated before, when you reach the end, you want to go through the tip of the weft once, create your knot, and then go through again twice to create your knot. This will prevent the edge of your closure from unraveling. Once you finish creating your 2 knots, leave your needle and thread intact, so that way, when you're sewing it at the top of your head, the needle is already connected to your closure. So now that you've finished sewing down your closure and your needle and thread is still connected, what you want to do is turn the closure over. You want to comb all of the hair down evenly and then flatten it with your flat iron. Make sure that the setting is on 350 degrees to make the hair as flat as possible. After you finish flattening down your closure, I will then show you how to sew the closure at the very top of your sew-in. After you finish flattening your closure, this is what the underside would look like. Now the underside won't be seen at all. It'll be right against your net as you sew your closure down. When you sew your closure down, you want to take your needle that you left connected. You want to go through your netting and then hook through the side of the weft to pull out and create a knot. So as you're sewing around your closure, you're going through your weaving net, through the edge of the weft, come out, create a knot. Do the same thing, go through your weaving net, go through this edge here, come out, create a knot. So you're going to do that all the way around until your closure is fully sewn down. Also, what you want to do to prevent these hairs from getting stuck is you want to put a rubber band on the hair. And also, if it helps, use clips to hold the hair as well to keep the hair out of the way. So now at this point, you're just going to use your hand to just place your closure where you want it to sit at the top of your head, and then you're just going to grab your needle and thread and begin stitching it down. So this is where I'm going to place it. Now if it's helpful, use a mirror too to make sure that you can see the top of your head. So what you want to do is grab your needle. You want to go through your net. Then you want to go through the edge of your closure. Then you're going to pull through to create your knot. Now just work your way going all the way around in very small increments to make sure that your knot's fully sewn down. So we're just going to go over just a little bit of space. Insert your needle into your weaving net and then go through the edge of your closure. And then create your knot. So just as I've stated before, keep repeating this process to work your way all the way around your closure, and then to come back to your starting point and secure your last knot where your first knot was created. So as you can see, after you've completely sewn down your handmade closure, this is how your hair should look at this point with your full sewing style. Use your flat iron to press against your closure once you've installed it if you want it to be just a little bit more flatter. So now that you're at this point, in the very next step, step number 5, I'm going to be teaching you how to create bangs with your full sew-in hairstyle. Welcome to step number 5 of the full sew-in hairstyle. In this step, I'm going to be teaching you how to create your Chinese bangs with your full sew-in hairstyle using Mrs. Rutter's hair extensions from mrsrutters.com. At this point, now that you've sewn in your closure, you can now begin styling your full sew-in. And what I'm going to be teaching you is how to create bangs for your style. Now, whenever you're cutting virgin hair, you want to make sure that you are already experienced with doing a particular cut or with cutting hair in general. If you aren't sure or you haven't had much experience cutting your own hair, then I suggest that you practice on maybe some cheaper hair to make sure that you're used to the motions and that you can perfect the cut before you do it on more expensive hair. So at this point, what you want to do is make sure that you have your scissors on hand. You want to make sure you have your rat tail comb and your flat iron on your temperature of 350. The first thing you want to do is section off the bang area that you're going to be cutting. Now, as high or as low as it goes will depend on your taste, but mine will fall about where my eyebrows are. Now, as far as how wide the bangs will be, I like to make sure that they're past my eyes, because if they're too far inward, they get in the way of my lashes and I have to constantly move hair out of the way. So that's the way you want to section your bangs, and I'm going to walk you through how you want to cut your bangs as well. So first, section your hair, and when you're combing your hair down, make sure that you're not forcing certain pieces to go a certain way, because if you cut that hair, that piece that you forced to lay a certain way will constantly cause problems. Let your hair flow naturally and just keep it sectioned off how you want it to be before you cut it. So now once you have your hair sectioned where you want your bang to be, go ahead and use your comb to comb down all of your hairs in a direction it naturally wants to lay for the last time, to make sure that if there's any hairs that are forcing them away to be away from your bangs, that you move those out the way. And other hairs that may seem to fall more in line of your bang, you can move those hairs into the section that you actually want to cut. So just comb all your hair down to make sure that you're not forcing any hairs in a certain way, so that you can make sure you're only cutting the appropriate hairs you want for your bang. So now for one final check, you want to make sure that you drop the bangs and check that it's going and laying down exactly how you want your bangs to be. So now that we're right before cutting, make sure that you gather all of your hair in a ponytail so none of your hair comes down, and then use these clips to help keep your hair sectioned layers at a time. The best way to cut your bangs is to make sure that you're doing so in small sections at a time. You want to make sure that you section off your first track to make sure it's combed all the way downwards, and then you're going to cut exactly how long or short you want the bang to be. Once you do that, that will serve as your guide for how far you're going to cut each thin layer, so that when we go to the second layer, you just comb the hair down very softly, allowing it to lay exactly how you want it to lay, and then you're going to slowly trim across to make sure it's going to be even with your first layer. After you finish cutting your bangs, this is what your full sew-in should look like. Now, as I've stated before you actually cut your extensions, you have to make sure that you know how to cut your hair appropriately by practicing on cheaper hair. Because if you accidentally cut your hair too high or mess up your cut in any way, you will have to start all over and take the hair down because the style wouldn't look right. When you're cutting your hair, you have to first establish a guide. That means that you're going to take your first track that's closest to your hairline and you're going to comb it down gently and let all the hairs lay exactly how they want to lay. By doing this, you're not forcing a hair to be a certain way so that when you cut it, it still lays exactly how it should lay. Once you establish where your guide will be by making a small snip at wherever area you want it to be, then you're going to finish cutting off both sides of that section of hair. That section of hair will guide exactly where you will cut each layer as you work on each section of extensions at a time. So after you do that, you go on to your next section, you let down a track of hair, you comb it down without forcing hairs to lay in a certain way. You just comb it down, and wherever they lay, you're just gonna cut and use your guide that you created, so that way the hair is exactly where you want it to end. As you do this, of course, you keep working your way all the way through, and then once you're done, just use your flat iron to lightly flip the ends just a little bit to give you that little bump for your bang. So now that your bangs are finished, in the very next step, step number 6, I'm going to be showing you the finished result to your full sew-in hairstyle. Here we are in step number 6, the finished results to the full sew-in hairstyle with Mrs. Rutter's hair extensions. Have fun enjoying your brand new look. So, now that your style is done, in the very next step, step number 7, I will be teaching you how to safely remove your extensions after you're done wearing your hairstyle. Here we are in step number 7 of the full sew-in hairstyle using Mrs. Rutter's hair extensions from mrsrutters.com. In this step, I'm solely focused on teaching you how to safely uninstall your full sew-in look. So here we are in the takedown process. First, I'm going to explain the process, and then I'm going to go ahead and uninstall my hair. The very first thing you want to do is to use your hair cutting scissors to remove your handmade closure. When taking down your hair, you have to work your way backwards. That means you're going to take down your closure. You're also going to trim off your extensions, and then take off your weaving net, and then cut the thread holding your braids to take down your braids. So if you remember the order of doing your hairstyle, you're going to work your way backwards to take down everything. So to begin, I'm going to be taking off my closure, and then I'm going to go through the process of doing each of those steps. Taking down my extensions, and then the weaving net, and then my braids. As you can see, the extensions are almost removed, and I wanted to make sure to point out the fact that I believe a weaving net is a necessity when you're wearing a sew-in, especially also with a full sew-in. The reason why is it's going to protect your hair and make it super easy for you to take out your extensions. Also, throughout the duration of style, because you have a net on top of your real hair, when you're combing through your extensions on a daily basis and things like that, the teeth of the comb aren't rubbing against your hair, which could cause breakage on top of your braids because you have a barrier due to the weaving net. So now I'm just going to finish taking them down, and then I'm going to start removing the weaving net. So as you can see, I've already begun taking down my net, and I'm just going to go ahead and finish clipping. So as you can see, taking down your install is a very simple process. If you're having trouble seeing the back of your head, then I highly suggest that you use a second mirror to help you to see those hard to reach areas. Also, if you need a little bit more help, have a friend assist you as you're taking down your style. And that is it for the full sew-in hairstyle tutorial. For your hair extension needs, be sure to purchase Mrs. Rutter's hair extensions from mrsrutters.com. Also, if you want to learn how to do other styles and learn other tips and tricks with your hair as well, be sure to visit howtoblackhair.com. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial.